friends, my name is Marines. It is Friday, June 26th, and so that means that tomorrow we have a House Salt live show, and I haven't started the book that we're going to read for tomorrow. I always save it for the last minute. I usually read the book like the day before or the day of. It's not a big deal, but it is a big deal today because I started this book last week to get a jump on it. I was like, I'm going to do the responsible thing. And I read one chapter and I was like, wow, I really don't want to read this. So my brain immediately went into you don't have to read it right now mode because, the deadline wasn't right there. But now the deadline is here and I'm kind of dreading reading the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Everything that I felt about like how I prejudged this book when it was announced that it was going to be a President Snow book, that first chapter kind of confirmed for me. And I know that I don't have the full story yet, but I know that a lot of my friends have expressed that they didn't necessarily enjoy it. So I don't know, this is just a weird book to be consuming in this economy. The entire reason that I didn't want a President Snow book was because I didn't want to read like the humanization of a child killer. Like that wasn't where I thought this book should go. And the first chapter is him just being sad about how poor he is. So I was immediately like, this is how you're gonna lead off, is with the humanization of the child killer. I don't know, so anyway, I don't know how this book is gonna continue, but I have to read it. And I figured that the best way to kind of motivate myself to do so was to do a reading vlog. I know that everybody has already gotten their reading vlogs and their thoughts out there, all those timely people, their timely content. Yeah, this is late. I don't know if anybody cares, but this is mostly for me at this point because I have to read this book. I have to read it. The live show is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so it's a race against the clock. Here we go. I sat up on my couch and then I scrolled through Twitter for 20 minutes. But then I read a page and then I hit this quote and it goes, "A tendency toward obsession was hardwired into his brain and would likely be his undoing if he couldn't learn to outsmart it." A little wink is not in the text. I just feel like that is such a because it's President Snow, seeing he gets obsessed with things. It will be his undoing if he can't learn to outsmart it. Like, calm down. It's page 11. If you're going to teach us about this character, take it easy and let us see, like, oh, he's always been obsessive. That's going to be bad for him. No, she tells us in so many words on page 11. I'm going to have so much fun reading this. This is not going well. I've only read 38 pages, but I've done so many other things that are not reading, but I'm having a hard time really getting into this because I feel bored. There are a couple of things in these first 38 pages, not that I have like a ton to say yet, but it's hard not to draw parallels from the original Hunger Games, and it is something that the author is obviously inviting you to do. So we have a reaping ceremony, and obviously you're going to immediately think of Katniss's reaping ceremony, and that I think is one of the most like emotional scenes, and it's something that it has kind of grown beyond just like the scene in the book into this whole like pop culture thing, like that whole I volunteer as tribute. It's like a meme. It has life of its own now. So I know that in my own head it's like inflated because of like the cultural context, I guess, but also this, like the comparison of that scene to this one is just like in this, the girl Lucy, she like puts a snake down a girl's dress and then gets up on stage and does like a song and dance, and like that whole idea, like that whole song and dance is truly how this feels. I don't know why, it just feels so kitschy to me, and to then compare it to like the emotional, like how somber the original reaping ceremony was to this. And I know that this isn't the Hunger Games that we know, and I think part of what this is doing is it's already set up that, it isn't quite the production that we come to see when Katniss is going through her Hunger Games. They're trying to figure that out still. But also, I don't know, the comparison fails here in this instance. And it's hard for me not to think that it's going to fail again and again as we compare the things that happen in the Hunger Games to Ballad. I really need to read this. Like, I can't make any more excuses. I need to put my head down. You're not going to see me again until I read 100 pages. That's my promise to myself. I laugh like I don't even believe it, but I need to do this. We're not even going to talk about how I kind of lied in that last one, but this is a thing that I noticed. So the tributes have just arrived at the train station, and again, paralleling what we know of the Hunger Games in the original trilogy, they arrive in train cars that are meant for cattle, basically. So it's not like the welcome that they get in the original, where it's like all fine food and they're in these lovely trains and that all that jazz. They literally come chained in and like bound in these cargo holds, basically. And so Snow is there waiting for his tribute. He figures he'll get a jump and introduce himself to her, and so he is not expecting this. Like, it stinks, all of them are crammed in there, they look pretty dirty at this point, and he has this thought that they really were creatures out of another world, a hopeless, brutish bunch. So at first his like shock, it registers as like, oh my god, like the shock that we feel that these, you know, human beings are being transported the way that they are, they are basically being likened to, you know, cattle at this point. So that is how we register his shock and equate it to our own. But then his thought is one that is, you know, othering. These people are not like us, and they're not only not like us, but they're brutish. So this starts to show us from the very beginning, because I'm still on page 40, that Snow is not a good person, that he has these like ingrained ideas when we meet him at the beginning of this, of like othering other people. He obviously has a big distaste for poverty and people who are poor and the people who are in the districts. And so if that is the baseline where we are starting, and we know who Snow ends up being, I'm not entirely sure what this book is doing. That doesn't set up an arc. That I don't think that this sets up any kind of arc at all. Like, where we're starting is that he's a dick. He's already a dick. We've met him and he is firmly in the camp and in the mindset and the frame set, you know, that he has to be in to become Snow, and that is not like an arc at all. That is like a straight line from where he is now. So that's the thing that has been getting to me, I think, since page 1. And I kind of mentioned how the whole thing is like, at first it felt like it was trying to humanize him and be like, oh, he's poor, he lost everything because of this war where he was the oppressor, you know, and the oppressed tried to rise up and he lost things in this war. And I was like, I don't like that. But it became quickly clear that I'm not, like, I don't know if it's trying to like sprinkle these things of humanization on there, but that Snow is not a good person, not at the beginning of the story. I'm not sure how many good things he's going to do, or how many moments of like weakness, of regretting that he's not a good person, but I honestly already don't understand the decision to make this the starting point for this character. Not that I wanted the story where he was going to go bad. He was a good person, something happened, he went bad. That's why I was kind of like rejecting this from the beginning. But the story that he was bad all along, but we're just going to explore the exact type of bad that he was, like, I don't want that one either. What are we doing here? I'm only on page 40. I have a cider now. Bottoms up, here's to reading. I'm seriously not going to worry about how much my makeup is smudged, because that is just showing the passage of time. So I finished part 1, which is 136 pages and about 30% of the book. Yeah, since my last update, when I showed you guys that I got a drink, the story has definitely settled. I feel like at the very beginning, as I already mentioned, there was something super heavy-handed about how it was introducing the world and the character, or reintroducing the world. Because this is a reintroduction, I was doing a lot of comparison, obviously. And I just think that when you get the opening scenes in the Hunger Games, it's Katniss with her bow, it's Katniss hunting to feed her family, then she returns home to face kind of like the coldness and the dynamic between her and her mother and her family. It's Katniss at the Hob, and you learn a lot about District 12 in these sorts of interactions. And you see through the interactions at the Hob and what Katniss tells us. Like, from her point of view, she says, like, nobody helps me here, but nobody can help me because everybody has so little. And yet you see that District 12 has some of that, like, survival rebellious spirit because the Hob exists. And you also see that people are helping Katniss even if she can't fully recognize it, because these people are, you know, dealing with this teenage girl. They don't have to, but they're treating her fairly. They're paying for her meat fairly. They're letting her, you know, trade at the Hob. They're treating her as an adult. So there are a lot of ways that they are reaching out and helping Katniss within their limited means. And all of this paints a picture of District 12 for us, but not only that, about like the poverty and what it means within the context of this world and this district and how people live their daily lives. It's a ton of world building and some really excellent and memorable scenes. Then we get this kind of like, you know, new story, and we start with an introduction to the world and basically the poverty. It's mirrored. It's inviting us to think about the way that these two things are reflected. And instead of anything at all subtle or anything like that, you literally have Snow saying things like, "Ugh, I hate boiled cabbage. It smells like poor people," which is almost a direct quote. And I'm just like, is this you, Suzanne? Is this you? Is this the same? Oh, I don't know. After about, I think, where was I, 40 or 50 pages at my last update, after about that point, the story does settle. It stops doing some of that stuff, and it starts introducing kind of the dynamics of this specific Hunger Games. And so you start getting action, and it isn't so much about telling us like what this world is, and that helps. I find myself like not bored to tears anymore. Like the first 50 pages, it was, I mean, it took hours for me to build the will to read it, and then like 50 to almost 150 where I am now, it went faster, and that is definitely helped on by the action. Now, the other thing though is that I feel like we've gone kind of in a different direction with Snow's characterization. And okay, it's fine if Suzanne didn't want to do like a normal arc for a character, because I feel like we meet him and you're immediately like, okay, this is President Snow, who is you know, a horrible person, and we already knew that because we know his future. So we meet him and we're like, yes, this is very clearly the horrible person that we know. But then things start setting up. He meets his you know, tribute or whatnot, and so then we really start to get the pieces that are humanizing him, in the sense that he has a lot of like reservations about the games, but specifically about some of the violence and how it ties to Lucy. And I get it, like, it's not that doesn't make sense to me, like that a bad person would be faced with this, I guess, more closely. It's a little bit questionable because I feel like this isn't anything that's new to this character at this point. It's definitely tied to the mentor. Maybe it's more like because he has feelings for this one person, he's now questioning things, which is a story you can tell, but again, why? And I'm not enjoying it. Like, is that really what you brought us back here to say, that this very terrible person once met like one person in the games that he cared about a little, and so he questioned it? Like, okay. I'm not gonna like it. But the entire idea of like showing us that at the 10th Hunger Games people were questioning this, I don't know what value add we get there. We know that the games, which were the 74th, I think, when Katniss was in them originally, like, we know that the games went on. So there was no amount of questioning the games that happened in the intervening years that ever amounted to anything. The games still exist. We know that in the future. So then flashing back and just feeding us all of this about people like, maybe we shouldn't kill children. Maybe you shouldn't, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't mean anything. And that observation means nothing to me because the Hunger Games exist. I know that. So again, why? I don't know. I still don't know, you know, 30% of the way into the book, why we're doing this. I don't have a clear direction. I know that I'm being like extra hard on this book right now, but I also don't think it's giving me a lot to work with. I mean, I didn't even want to read it at all. It was boring for the first portion, and now that it is not as like painfully boring, I'm still like, I'm gonna take a little break from reading. I still have a heck of a lot to read. I shouldn't take any breaks, especially because I wasn't reading before. But I'm gonna watch an episode of TV to kind of like cleanse the palate, and maybe do some, light doom scrolling on this fine Friday night. But I just need a little break from this because I did sit down and like concentrate for a while, and then I will get back into reading. Maybe another 100 pages before bed. Let's get crazy. I almost said good morning, which just time is so irrelevant right now. But last night I watched 2 episodes of Bones, and then I went to bed. I thought that I would just read some before going to bed at a moderately decent hour, and then I could wake up this morning and finish reading the book. But I could not fall asleep last night. Some of it was that I was kind of having a lot of emotions about this book, like was thinking about it a lot, and then Nicole was also reading it, so we were kind of going back and forth about it. But then I don't know, I didn't feel that worked up about it, honestly. Like, it is bad and annoying, but it was just kind of like, I couldn't fall asleep, whatever. It is what it is. So I kept like trying to fall asleep, but then like, okay, I'm not sleeping, might as well read a little bit more, which probably made things worse. So that happened until about 6 o'clock this morning, until I finally fell asleep. And then I woke up afternoon, so I was already like late. Really late. So after I finally managed to get myself out of bed, I got ready for today's live show, and I'm at 90% of the book. So, I mean, it's fine. It's gonna work out. I did everything just in time. Not ideal. Would have rather slept and read this morning and not like until the crack of dawn, but here we are. And the live show starts in about 30 minutes, which I have 30 minutes to finish the last 10% of this book, and then we will be live. As I've kept reading, I am not enjoying this. This book keeps answering questions that I feel like nobody asked, and it keeps going like it isn't even Easter eggs at this point. Like, honestly, to have President Snow sitting in District 12 and somebody could be like, this is a swamp potato, but we like the other name better. It's Katniss. Like, at that point, like, I understand it's a plant name, but to honestly take it to that extreme, they make mention of the loose bit of fence behind the generator. Like, nobody, I mean, maybe not nobody, but I definitely was not thinking, how did President Snow know about that when I was reading The Hunger Games? Because it was just kind of given that he was spying on everybody. So then to come back here and be like, he knows because he was in District 12, like, I don't care. That was never a question that I had. And then, so when the title of this book came out, it was like The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Everyone was like, that's awful. Especially because it did not seem to fit in with what the previous trilogy was. But, you know, it should have given me personally a hint that this was basically a musical. Like, the number of lyrics just printed, as especially in the second half or like part 3 of the book, I'm over it. It is too much, and I say that as somebody who reads Tolkien. It's too much there also. This is too much. And then, I mean, not only is it too much, but when we did the Snark Squad Pod episode of The Hunger Games, our friend Sam, who was the guest on that episode, was talking about how even in The Hunger Games, when she did like her few like folk songs or whatnot, she took a moment to be like, you know what that means, right? The hanging tree. Here's what the song means. And it's like, okay, Suzanne, like, let the reader interpret. Like, trust your reader enough to see the lyrics and be like, oh, this is what it means. But no, she always like was like, hey, here's what this lyrics means, and she keeps doing that in here too. Like, and it's the stupidest thing. Like, you know, the song about Lucy Gray, about, you know, she left and she never returned, and then you literally have Snow going like, okay, she died. Yes, we got that from the lyrics. Why is this happening? I think that there's this whole like thing about like exploring the psyche, if you will, of Snow, and like this being like the tipping point of how he becomes who he becomes. But I don't feel like we're actually close enough to his thoughts and feelings to be a true exploration of that. Like, honestly, I don't see I don't see that this is a tipping point, because I don't think that he ever loved anybody. I don't think that he's doing anything out of anything other than self-interest. Like there's no moment in this book that I buy that he's going to be anything other than the bad person that we met at the beginning of the story, that we know exists in the future. There's no point where I buy like, oh my god, maybe he'll fall in love. And that isn't only because I know how it ends, because you never know, maybe that he was good for 10 years of his life or whatever such nonsense, but the characterization is such, and the writing is such, and the plotting is such, that I'm just like, yeah, this dude is bad. Like there's nothing here that is convincing me otherwise. And if the best thing that you have when you're like, how did this terrible child murdering villain dictator become the way he was, and you flash us back and the best answer you have is like, he was poor, war is bad, and maybe he fell in love, like that's why you brought us back here? That's it? Like I'm not happy with this. Right now I'm like trying to gather all of my thoughts for the live show and like what the heck I'm gonna say. Like there's so much, so trying to like just remember everything I felt and I've said, and all of that is just what I need to do right now, in addition to actually finishing the book. I don't even know how it ends and I'm already like 1 star, so that's gonna be fun. I will do the live show and then I'll probably jump back on here for a final update about the end of the book, how the live show went, and wrap up my feelings. I don't know if you've picked up so far on what I'm putting down, but in general is that I didn't like it. It's pretty late now. After we did the live show, we always stay hanging out and we talked a long time. I did finish the book right before the live show, like literally had like 2 minutes to spare, and then did the live show. So I processed a lot of my feelings, or at least about the end, or like the overall story, like real time. And I just am really, this was not a good experience. I think I said I gave it 1.5 stars on the live show. I'm kind of considering whether or not that's true. So I when I rate things, it's quality, a little bit of enjoyment, but not like the majority thing. And then I do a lot of like in genre comparison, and then also like star rating comparison. So for my other 1-star books, they're like things that I'm very vocal about not liking, things like Twilight and 50 Shades, and The Selection I gave 1 star. So things that I think have no redeeming qualities is, and then but on top of that, there's also like a lack there of some sort of like technical like storytelling or writing ability. It's not only that this book didn't work for me, and I understand that this is all subjective, like there's no like good or bad, but it's not only like enjoyment wasn't there, but that I personally feel like there was a lack of some sort of storytelling or writing ability on top of that. So that's like my 1 star. And the thing with Suzanne Collins is that I think that she's a capable writer, and there were things here that were written well enough that putting it in a category with other 1-star books doesn't feel entirely right. But on the other hand, while like her sentences were strung together fine, there was like a lack of storytelling ability here. There wasn't good characterization. I think the pacing had problems. I did not buy a lot of what she was trying to sell me in a lot of the book. Like I didn't think that she fleshed out her character enough that if we were ever supposed to think that he was anything other than he was, like if she ever wanted me to think that he was falling in love or that he had second thoughts about being the person that he was, I didn't quite buy that. And to me, that is kind of on par with not writing something well. So 1.5 stars seemed right to me, like a little better than some of my 1-star books, but also not good and not enjoyable. I don't understand what the purpose of this book was, and not that everything has to have like a lesson or I guess a point, but stories have purposes, and even if that purpose is to entertain you or something of that nature, I don't know what the purpose of this book was, because it wasn't like an entertainment book, but it also didn't have much to say. Or like I feel like that if Suzanne Collins thought she was saying something with this book, that she was mistaken. I don't think that it was close enough inside of Snow's head or told with enough like insight into his thoughts and feelings for it to be like a true psychological look. And I think that if a lot of the things that it was saying about him as the person he eventually grows up to become are things that are really basic and that aren't explored inside of the text. A lot of his thoughts about like the worth of humanity or about the inherent evilness of humanity, like those are not new thoughts, and she just presents them without much commentary in a way that I'm not sure what she thought she was doing. And it's all themes that were already explored within the original trilogy, and it's all things that we, the reader, like filled in or were able to fill in. A lot of those questions about the goodness of humanity, a lot of the questions about how far you will go if you're put in a situation like the Hunger Games, a lot of the ideas around how somebody would be able to swallow something like the Hunger Games came from what we saw throughout of how it was sensationalized, of how it was packaged and the propaganda that goes with it. So then to bring us back to this point and then tell us that before that the games were brutal and nobody wanted to watch it, but if you sensationalize them, people will want to watch them. Like, we knew that already. We got that in the original trilogy. And I guess it's fine if Collins wanted to rehash that, but I am not entirely sure why or what she thought she was adding by spelling things out in the way that she did. I don't feel like I got more insight into Snow as a character. He is exactly who I thought he was. He had very classic oppressor thoughts and tendencies, so it wasn't like there was anything like super special or nuanced about him. I don't think she wrote him in a particularly charming way that kind of showed us how he got into power or how he obtained it or how he maintained it, I should say. The other characters that are around him were plot devices and were not fully fleshed out. Lucy Gray ends up being a manic pixie dream girl in a dystopian setting, that there's not a lot of agency there. She's not fleshed out in a way that she felt like a fully formed character. She was basically the vessel into which Snow was investing feelings that he thought were love that were clear to the audience, I think, that were never love but were self-interest. And so she exists to be that vessel, and that's kind of it. And so by the time that you get to the third part and you're really starting to see what you known all along, that this isn't love and it's going to end badly, it happens so quickly and so obviously that it's just like, what is the point here? I keep coming back around to this question of why this story, why this point of view, why did she feel like adding this? I feel like it almost, like, not in a way that makes me think less of the Hunger Games, but I feel like in a lot of ways that she came back and not retcon but added a lot of context to what the Hunger Games are and his connections to Katniss. It cheapens some of what the Hunger Games does. Like, Katniss is, like I said in the live show, like nobody from nowhere, and so that story of her and just Snow's hatred of what she represents because of her story of rebellion and getting caught up in that, it's almost cheapened by all of these other ideas of Katniss being tied to Snow because she's from District 12, because of her name even, that is like a root that is found in this district, because he loves somebody, like all of that, like that is extra context answering questions I didn't have. It is cheapening the sort of ideas of just, this is like this man hates everybody, he's a child murderer, like it doesn't matter what his specific connections are to this girl because of what she ultimately represents for his like power. So I honestly, I really did not like this at all. I think that this was very, very cheap. I think it was heavy-handed. I think that it was boring for a lot of the time. I think that the pacing was completely off. I think that the third part of the book felt like an entirely different book, and it was also a book I didn't want to be reading. I just don't have a lot positive to say about this. Why we needed this story in 2020. I know that she wrote it before this time, but I think that in the context of everything that's happening in 2020, it was like a particular insult to be reading from this perspective. The story of a white man afraid to lose power, having lost wealth, and the ways that he sees himself as the victim, and the way that he fights against the rights of others because of the way that it will affect him personally and his own personal wealth and power. That is a story you can tell. It was not ever going to be a story that I felt particularly attracted to or that I felt was particularly good for this time. And on top of that, I think that Collins completely bungled it in the telling, in her writing, in the pacing, in what it ultimately says, in a completely flat and meaningless character arc. And I don't know if there's anything more to say than that. I'll probably cleanse my palate by watching a Hunger Games movie and eating my takeout. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It took me a heck of a long time to like really get started reading, and then I barely slept last night trying to finish this thing, and I was so worked up about it, but it's over now and I never have to read this book again. In fact, I'm gonna start right now actively trying to forget it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.